Hi, this is Robin, and in this video I'm going to show how to make a vignette in Photoshop. Now, a vignette is either a dark or a light area that can be used to border a photo or for selected components of a photo. It can be very subtle, and you can put a very soft transition between your image and the vignette, or you can use a vignette that's very hard-edged, very obvious, and makes a real statement. I'd say the main benefits to using a vignette is that it can keep your viewer's eyes inside the image frame or can draw attention to specific parts of your image that you want to emphasize. So for instance, in my image here, this has a lot of bright, this is a stock photo, a lot of bright light around the edges of this image, and that can tend to draw viewers' eyes out because they tend to get attracted to bright things to look at in an image. So putting a soft or dark vignette around the outside of this image would force the viewer to tend to look more towards the center of the full image, and then they'd focus more on the specific objects or subjects in the scene. Now, on the other hand, I said you could also use it for selective influence or selective attention. And if I wanted to just put focus on the strawberries and the bowl and the vase and the flowers, then you could draw a vignette that just specifically is around them. So it takes up a lot more space than just the borders of the image. It's really up to you how you want to use a vignette, but it does serve those purposes of keeping your viewer's eyes inside the frame or directing their attention. So let's get right into how to make a vignette. So we have our background image open. As I said, it's a stock photo, and I'm going to drag it to the bottom of the layers panel to the box with the plus, which is the add new layer icon. Or if you want, you can, on that background layer, just use a Control or Command J, and that'll jump it up to create a background layer so you're not working on the original, okay? Now, the tool I'm going to suggest using to create the vignette in this video is the Marquee tools. And we have an elliptical marquee, which is this one here, which is an oval shape. And if you right-click on that little arrow, it'll also reveal there's a rectangular marquee. You can decide for your image whether you'd like more of a vignette that's more rounded or more oval, or more rectangular or square. It's really your choice for your image. Now, just so you know, the way we use this is left click and start just dragging out. And you can see there's a selection being dragged out as I'm holding my left mouse button and just dragging this out. If you want, and let me just undo this for a moment, to press the Shift key, and this will hold for either the elliptical marquee or the rectangular marquee. If you press the Shift key while you're dragging out, with the elliptical marquee, you'll get a circle, and with the rectangular marquee, that's how you could form a square. So it's really up to you which shape you want to use. I'm going to go for the oval. So I'm just going to left click, keep that left click button depressed, and pull out. Okay, and now you'll see by doing that with that marquee tool, the elliptical marquee, I have formed a selection. Now, this didn't quite hit where I wanted to hit here on my selection for my vignette. I really wanted it to be further out and closer to the borders of this image, but I've purposely missed here to show you that you don't have to keep starting over again if you don't get it just right from dragging out. If it doesn't end up where you want, keep that active selection, go to the top of your interface to the select menu, click on that and come down to where it says transform selection, left click on that. And you'll see now we have this pink bounding box, and you can move the outside of this vignette to where you want it to be. So there are the bounding box with little handles. I'm going to click on and left click and drag to where I want this to be, and the selection snaps up to where the bounding box is. Here, I'll come a little further left out this way and watch what the selection does. It hops out. I'll do the same thing over here on the right. I'll pull this out this way more, and then I'll go down to the bottom here. Okay, now you don't have to just work with the bounding boxes that are in the center. You can also work with the ones in the corner and just drag diagonally. So let's say I want to get this out a little further beyond the petals. You can drag those corners that way too. All right, so when you get your selection the way you want it, then click on this check mark at the top of the interface to accept it. And now we have the selection that's going to form the vignette. And you can see it's a selection because there are marching ants. Now, if we just create a mask from this, which is what we want to do, what's going to happen is the center is going to be all white. And that's not good because a mask will show what's white. And if we want to darken the edges, that's reverse of what we want to do. We want to be able to darken outside this selection. So in order to be able to create a mask on this layer that does that, we're going to press and hold the Alt or the Option key, come to the bottom of the Layers panel, and click on the layer mask icon, which is this rectangle with the circle in it. So it's forming a little mask. And there we go. On that layer, we now have a layer mask that represents what we want to be the vignette, which is the white area. Masks in Photoshop, the white shows or reveals, and the black on the mask hides. So whatever we do to this, it will be hidden here and it will be showing here. And since I want my vignette around the outside, this is exactly how I want my mask. Okay. So now we have to darken or lighten it, because I said at the beginning, you can either darken or lighten with a vignette. So now we're going to add an exposure adjustment layer in order to do that. So with this layer still active where we made the selection, come to the bottom of the layers panel, to the new adjustment layer icon, which is the circle with the line. Click on that, come down to where it says exposure and left click. And now we have a new exposure adjustment layer in the layers stack. Now, we want to make the vignette darker or lighter depending on what it is that you want to achieve. I want to go darker for my demo. What we need to do is get this mask onto this layer. So all you have to do is left click with the mouse and drag that up and release, and it'll say replace layer mask, and you say yes. And so now we have the mask on the exposure layer that will let us create the vignette. Now with the thumbnail active for the exposure layer, look in your properties panel and go to the exposure slider. As I said, if you want to make it your vignette brighter, you can certainly do that. Then you'd pull the exposure slider to the right. If you want it to be darker, you pull that exposure slider to the left. And you don't have to go to the extremes. You can go anywhere along that slider that you want it to be. And I just want a really sort of a subtle, I don't want it to be too dark. I just want to subliminally have something that keeps the viewer's eyes more towards the center of this image. So I'm going to at least leave mine there for now. Now, you'll see I still have a fairly defined line there. And for mine and what I want to do in my image, I don't want that. I want a much more subtle, as I said, subliminal sort of demarcation between the main part of the image and the vignette. So we're going to move from working actively with the thumbnail, and you can see it's active because it has the white frame around it. We're going to left click on the mask. And now the mask is active because it has the white frame. Again, now we're going to look in the properties panel for that layer. And this time we're coming to the properties panel to the slider that says feather. And the more you leave that feather left, the harsher the line you'll see. The more you pull it to the right, the more subtle and transitional that will be. Watch the image as I do this. You can see it's getting more and more subtle. So I'll do it again so you can watch the image. There's far left feather. And as I start coming in, the feather gets softer and softer. The transition gets softer and softer, and the vignette gets more subtle. So let me show you on the mask how that looks. See, remember before it had a defined line, and now look at how subtle. So the white and the dark are adjusting how subtle the transition will be between the main part of your image and your vignette. So that is it. That is how you create a vignette. So you can do the same process for either using the elliptical marquee or the rectangular marquee, and then you can adjust the exposure to your taste, whether you want it darker or lighter or brighter, or whether you want it harder edged or softer edged. So that is what's involved in making the vignette. Very simple few steps. That said, let me just give you a couple of things that you could do if you want to do some finishing touches to it. These are purely optional because this is not just the vignette per se. All right, so let's say by adding, oh, and let me show you the difference here just so you can see. So here is how it started, and here is what we've added. So you can see it's pretty subtle, but it tends to keep your eye in here more versus somebody's eye being able to go all the way out to the edges. So that's the point of that. Okay, now let's say maybe this loses or gets a little dull when you have the darker around the edges. Now something you can do is add at the bottom of your layers panel a new adjustment layer for brightness, and just subtly give another slight hint of brightness to bring back some differentiation. So that's what I'm going to do for mine. So bottom of the layers panel, come down to the add new adjustment layer icon, that circle with the line through it. Come down to where it says brightness and contrast. Okay, so now we have a brightness adjustment layer. And what I want to do is use the same mask, but on that layer. And I don't want to start all over again. So holding your Alt or Option key and keep it depressed, left click on this mask that you originally created, drag it up to the brightness layer and release. And it says replace layer, you say yes. But this time, we don't want that black in the center, because remember I said Photoshop works on where there's white. So we want to click on this, and in the Properties panel, click where it says Invert. You want to invert the mask. And I believe there might be a shortcut where you can do Control or Command I. You could experiment with it and see. But the simple way to do it is just to look to see where it says Invert. And you can see now this mask is the inverse of this mask, and the white is at the center. And that's what we want, because I said we want to add a touch of brightness. So click on the thumbnail for the brightness layer. In the Properties panel, go to the brightness slider, and you can just add a hint maybe of brightness to this if you felt like it got a little dull. See, it just brightens it up again, but it's still keeping, and if you do it too much, you can take it down a little bit with the opacity slider. So to me, that adds a nice new look to this original image by adding that vignette and the hint of brightness. Now, I don't want to go through all of the steps, so I had something pre-selected just to be able to show you here. So as I said, that was putting a vignette at the border. You can also do a vignette that's at a selected part of an image, as I've done here. So you can see where the mask is for the vignette, and the vignette is the white part on the layer mask. And you can see I just wanted to highlight this part of the image. So, and this, you can see I've gone for a darker look. It's not hiding the other elements, but it gives a more statement look of, I want you to look here in the image. Another thing you can do is you can add a hue or saturation adjustment to the vignette. So let's say you want to make a statement, add a, at the bottom of your layers panel, you can add a hue saturation layer, which is what I've done here. Let me just turn it on because it's already done. And then with that hue saturation layer active, click on the thumbnail. In the Properties panel for that layer, you have a hue slider. So that's what will let you adjust the colors. And you also have a little word down here that says colorize. And often you cannot put color into bright white areas of your image. But if you click that little colorize to on, then you can add color. And once it's on like that, then you can start sliding your hue slider and adjust the color of the vignette if you'd like. So it's really up to you. And again, if that's too much, you can either add a blend mode, or you can lower the opacity and just make it more subtle. So that was what I wanted to show you in this sort of short about how to make a vignette in Photoshop.